Welcome back to Cycles Chats. I'm joined by Ben Sims from Team Tughans. Thank you ever so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks to the Tughans team for being one of the sponsors, obviously, of the startup zone that we're in at the moment. So we've got 13 startups showcasing. We've got, obviously, the corporates, obviously, supporting and sponsoring the area. Why do you think it's really important that we have the support of the corporate sector in Northern Ireland to back this type of thing?
I think from our perspective at Tughans, this has always been an important event. It's very well attended, as you can see the last 2 days. It's a great event just to build connections. We already have quite a strong connection into the ecosystem, but from our perspective, the more kind of visibility and conversations we can have with people, the better. I think this year we're in the startup zone, obviously. We're keen just to kind of get really stuck into meeting people. Now we're in a face-to-face context again, which is great.
Oh, yeah, it's brilliant to
nice.
be back, isn't it? And having chats with people as well. And, like, you can start to see some of the kids from the schools have started coming in as well. And it's really important to the ecosystem that people are integrated into the tech sector as early as possible, isn't it, as well? Like,
absolutely, couldn't agree more. And I think particularly in the fintech space, obviously so many firms now do apprenticeships and kind of junior roles. So seeing some of the school blazers around here has been great to show that.
And it's brilliant just to be back at Digital DNA as well. So tell us a little bit more about, obviously, the corporate team and what you guys do at Tughans.
Yeah, of course. So I'm a director in our corporate team. So we do a lot of kind of venture capital, kind of PE stuff, particularly in this kind of early stage, startup stage. So we'll act for funders as well as companies. Okay. And then as companies kind of go through their life cycle in the ecosystem, we'll kind of support them maybe on later rounds of funding. So it's really quite mixed, and there's a lot of familiar faces for us in the room today, which is great.
No, it's great. And obviously, like, there's a few startups that have kind of been slightly in stealth over the last kind of probably 6-9 months. Probably even lockdown has probably kind of aided that a little bit, that people have not been so able to get out there and talk about what they're doing. So, like, obviously from a legal perspective, when you're looking at raising a round, what are the type of things that you need to start thinking about?
I think, without trying to sound too stereotypical kind of lawyer, we would always say before a round you need to make sure your kind of house is in order, because there's a quite a clear number of issues that the funder's going to ask, around kind of contractual arrangements you've got in place, how you're protecting your IP, what your kind of employment profile looks like. Do you have contracts for employees? There's probably a list of a few quick points like that that we would always recommend the client just make sure they're all given the right level of attention and TLC, because what you don't want is obviously to go out for a round of investment and then really easy things to get wrong like this aren't covered, and then it kind of sours that conversation with the funder from the start.
100%. And, like, you kind of like need a bit of a checklist, really, don't you, to work through, so that when you're going to see an investor, you've already got those things in place. You've done that due diligence. Yes,
100%. And listen, a funder can look at a potential investment and love the idea and love the people and love the kind of opportunity, but if they're kind of telling the startup about really basic things about protecting their IP, it tends to limit the potential for that conversation to progress to the next level.
So it's kind of like, obviously, from an investment perspective, the fear would be that if they haven't done the basics right now, then what happens down the line, obviously, when a deal flow is potentially agreed?
100%. And you have to remember that the funders are accountable themselves internally. So if they miss something, like the IP is totally not adequately protected, or there's no contracts in place, they have to think of their own stakeholders, obviously, internally. So it's about making sure you don't kind of trip them up, which trips yourself up effectively.
Totally. I was chatting to 4 startups or founders this morning on a panel, and they'd gone through the process of raising investment, and it was kind of slightly telling that as much as some of the early stage investment had happened in Northern Ireland, maybe some angel investment and really early stage seed level stuff, that I think out of the 4 founders, I think all of them had to go outside Northern Ireland to kind of finish those rounds, or maybe even to get investment internationally. Is that something that Tughans can still help with in terms of that approach?
It is, and I think our understanding and kind of experience, if you like, is very much reflective of that. That at a kind of early stage of the ecosystem, there's definitely plenty of opportunities for funding at that kind of seed level. As you go through the life cycle and build up to a higher round, exactly what you've said, that people generally do need to go outside of NI.
Yeah.
And maybe that's kind of down to London, to some of the kind of established startup zones. But Tughans can support on that, and we would see that as kind of tracking through that relationship with the client through the kind of next level of their life cycle.
And from a founder's perspective, it's probably slightly not a legal thing, this question, but how do you find the right type of investor? I mean, obviously, is it a kind of meeting of minds in a sense, or it must be quite scary for a startup to turn down investment, for example, if they don't like the fit of the investment company? Any advice on that you can think of?
Yeah, I think a lot of it should and could come down to kind of fit and personality, as you say.
Yeah.
Because it's an inherently personal thing for a startup to take funding, because as we all know, that funding doesn't come unconditionally. There will be strings attached. There will be usual investor rights in there.
Yeah.
And consent matters where they need approval.
Yeah.
So if the relationship from a non-legal sense kind of goes off on the wrong foot, and there isn't that meeting of minds, as you say, I think that's absolutely the right statement, that potentially causes problem later on. So I think getting an enthusiastic investor who who gets the idea and they can get on well and work kind of progressively with, that is hugely important, and potentially is missed sometimes by both investors and startups.
100%. And then finally, let's try and demystify a few terminologies perhaps that we use within the startup space that maybe early stage founders wouldn't know. And I wanted to just ask, from your perspective, what's the difference, say, for example, between a seed round and then when people talk about Series A, B, even following on C? What does that mean?
No, and it's a really good question, and it comes up all the time. And without getting too legalistic around it, the way we would explain that to a client is always, if you imagine it's a kind of progression, and at each level of those different thresholds, there'll be sometimes a different group of funders that are willing to invest. Some don't go for seed and will only go when you get to Series A, Series B. And other players will be the opposite and will only play pre-Series A. So in its most simple and non-legal sense, it's industry recognised levels of funding that take place, and the requirements and the expectations and the kind of market norm on term sheets and types of rights that people get are generally kind of reflective of each level of that life cycle. So imagine it almost as milestones, if you like, through the process.
And let's perhaps give a shout out to maybe a few founders that or startups that you know or have worked with. Is there any that you can think of, obviously, and sorry, this is on the spot kind of question, but is there any, obviously, perhaps that are here today, or obviously that you've seen recently that you thought this is going to be a startup that we should look out for over the next 12 months?
Classic lawyer answer. I'm going to, so as not to offend any of the people, I don't shout out on the spot.
No, fair enough.
I'll say there's very many kind of familiar faces here to Tughans, and I know a lot of the team, including Andrew and Paul, have been down and have seen people. So there's a lot of people we do know, and we're great to see them, but equally there's a hell of a lot of people we haven't seen who we want to build a relationship with.
No, rock and roll. And you can see, and I agree with you on that, because I don't generally do that either. What I would say is, looking at the startups that are here, I can identify at least 2 or 3 already that if they're not doing some kind of investment deal in the next 12 to 18 months, you'd be very surprised.
And I agree. And if the volume and the capacity of people here is any barometer of interest in this space, and the number of people exhibiting is any kind of guide of the size of the market, then that's a really good barometer.
We're doing all right. We're doing all right. There's lots more to do, and lots obviously to improve on. But at an early stage, I think at least we're pretty well kind of established and sorted in terms of that infrastructure that exists in Northern Ireland. So, but obviously, as like you say, someone kind of scales and grows, you do need that continuous legal advice, and it's not something you can just pick and choose with. And I suppose from my observation as an ending point, what I would say is if you don't get proper legal advice, it will fall back on you maybe down the line, and that's something obviously that a lot of founders have had to go through, that pain point, haven't they?
Yeah, I agree. And we've already talked about the importance of it at the start for getting funding initially. But you're right, absolutely completely agree. As you go through that process, if you're blind to certain things,
Yeah.
or maybe you don't understand some of the terminology in the term sheet,
Yeah.
There's always a risk that's going to come back in the future and cause a problem.
Yeah.
So getting advice early from kind of, people who know what they're talking about, and Tughans is one of the firms that I would put in that category clearly.
No, happy days, Ben. And you're going to have to say that you work for Tughans. But I'm only joking. Like, we've done loads of stuff together, and obviously the sector obviously does need the likes of Tughans obviously to do that, because as the ecosystem gets wiser and more knowledgeable, but also more advanced and more established as a tech space within Europe, we do need that kind of international knowledge as well. So obviously Tughans obviously adds to that enormously, and thank you for all the support you've offered at Digital DNA this year as well.
No, you're welcome, and it's our pleasure, and we love to see it thriving and getting bigger and bigger every year, and we want to be part of that for sure.
Yeah, rock and roll. Ben, thank you ever so much for joining us. This is Starticus Chats, and we'll be back after a short break. Thank you.